I think that's a matter for the Reserve Bank, but I mean, my views on the effectiveness of intervention are very well known.
What about the rate that the dollar is having?
Well, I mean, look, the high exchange rate obviously presents real concerns for those that are not commodity linked and have no imported component of the product that they produce. And for the most part, where we face a competitive exchange rate, as we do with Australia, that's to the benefit of those exporting companies. But it's not all bad news when we have a high exchange rate. It certainly takes the pressure off consumers in terms of imported items, price of petrol, and takes some pressure off the Reserve Bank in terms of imported inflation. So, for the most part, it's not an entirely negative story, but it is putting some pressure on those companies.
Yep. Is the debt crisis going to alleviate that pressure on our dollar?
I think it might help in the short term. What's been putting enormous pressure on the exchange rate has been the uncertainty in the US financial markets and the fact that no one could rule out that the US could default, although that was seen to be very, very unlikely. But I mean, I think the reality is that it's one thing to get a deal in the US, and obviously that's what's happened now, if we accept that that's the likely outcome as a result of the meetings in the United States today. But we still see in the United States a very, very heavy debt burden, and we're seeing quite sluggish growth, high levels of unemployment, and that is putting a lot of pressure on the US economy. And that's one of the reasons why New Zealand assets have been re-rated and US assets are being re-rated negatively. And that position's not changing.
So what can we really do here, Prime Minister, in the face of this extremely high dollar? What can actually be done?
Well, I think all you can do is do everything you can to try and make New Zealand companies as competitive as possible. And that means the process and the policies that we've followed. I mean, making sure that we take the burden off red tape, making sure labour markets are flexible, making sure infrastructure is there. I mean, I think if you go and have a look at the track record of countries that have intervened in their exchange rate, then they've been spectacularly unsuccessful. And there's no particular reason to believe that New Zealand would be any different. It's possible you might hit the top occasionally or the bottom if you're trying to go against the trend, but for the most part it hasn't been a successful strategy for Japan or Australia or Switzerland or many other countries.
There's nothing we can do.
Well, only simply because at the moment you're up against a massive economy that's having substantial financial issues, and so on that basis they're re-rating the New Zealand exchange rate. Hopefully it'll turn around.
Something else that could push the US dollar down is the third round of quantitative easing.
Yeah.
Did you get any indication from Mr. Bernanke on?
Well, we raised the issue with him and he just reiterated his public comments, which is that's not likely at this time.
Just back on the exchange rate.
Yep.
What about a broader discussion about things we could do, such as a tax or something on so-called hot money? I mean, how?
Yeah, well, again, I mean, that's very dangerous territory for a country that's capital strapped, that has massive net external liabilities. I mean, no OECD country borrows more of its borrowing from foreigners than New Zealand. So if you put a tax on that, you have to get into the definition of what is hot money, what is legitimate investment in New Zealand. You run the risk that you ultimately force up interest rates, and that's a more expensive burden on the economy. So, I don't think that's practically going to work. I mean, interestingly enough, if you look in the United States, one of the big arguments that Secretary Geithner, that Ben Bernanke and Obama all made to me was that actually a high exchange rate, is, they believe, something that they're highly supportive of. And the reason for that is they believe it leads to more benefits than the opposite.
Another way to get off reliance on that hot money could be compulsory savings regime. Is that one of the reasons you're looking at, sort of soft compulsion thing? Why are you looking at?
Well, because we think it's in the best interest to have as many people in the scheme as possible, because we think it's a good scheme. I mean, ultimately you're getting subsidised by the government, you're getting subsidised by your employer for the most part, generally. I mean, one of the reasons why it may not necessarily lift national savings just because you have had compulsory saving is because if people dissave in another form, it doesn't necessarily overall lift savings. So you just got to be a bit careful there.
But could help move savings out of investing properly into it?
It might, or they might just run higher credit card bills or bigger personal loans.